So also, it's been a year since the murder of George Floyd. A lot has happened, protest movement around the world, a trial, a verdict. We're sitting here, and I want to ask you, what do you think has changed?
You look at the verdict of Chauvin, right? And a lot of people celebrated that verdict. And when I look at that, I think about, growing up as a kid, you don't celebrate the things that you are supposed to do. Like you're supposed to make good grades. So you don't get a party thrown for you when you do the things that you're supposed to do. So it's somewhat disturbing in a way because when you're celebrating par for the course, you think you've made some progress.
It feels like progress.
Yeah, it feels like progress. And I think when it comes to, addressing the issue of race in America, it's been a lot of work done, but there's a lot more work to do. It's like pushing a boulder up the hill. You push it up 3 feet and it rolls back 2 feet. You've made some progress pushing it up a foot, but you're tired as hell, but you still got more to go.
And that kind of feeling of being tired can sometimes be energized by people paying attention, right? I mean, I think one thing that I learned in reporting, I haven't gotten out that much, but I ended up being able to meet the mother of Elijah McClain, who was killed by police in Colorado in 2019. But the world didn't really know his name, broadly speaking, until after George Floyd. After George Floyd was murdered, the Colorado state legislature passed some police reform stuff. Like, things happened in a quicker fashion, so to speak, after the murder of George Floyd. So the attention itself is something that can be galvanizing, no?
Yeah, absolutely. When you put more eyeballs on something like that being an atrocity, it's like some people were engaging in cognitive dissonance, if you will, or willful ignorance.
Yeah.
But when the world has woken up and paid attention to the transgressions against Black and brown people in America, it's hard to not do something about it, whether it be from pride, or shame. If something is happening, it's a step forward, but it's still, I tell you, Krishna, sometimes I still get angry, bro. Like I interviewed Philando Castile's mother, and she told me on her front porch, she's like, when George Floyd got killed, they reached out to her to see if she could speak to the people, to calm them down. And she was like, hell no. No, I did it when you killed my son, and I told you that we were 1 inch away from tearing this motherfucker down. But y'all didn't listen. And now you're gonna have to listen. And I think the result of them listening is that, attention that's being paid towards it.
But so much of it is about listening, about believing what Black people have been saying for decades, if not centuries, that this world is not tipped in their favor. The benefit of the doubt is never given to the Black American when there's a police encounter. Maybe not never, but quite rarely. And this is a moment where people are starting to listen, but maybe because of how angry everyone got. And I want to ask you, you were there in Minneapolis in the days after George Floyd's murder. You were there to see the police response to the demonstrations and there to see the feelings of people on the ground. How much do you think that this wasn't just a demonstration with signs and placards? It was like an explosion of frustration, anger, of people being fed up with seeing this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the majority of people were there because they were fed up and angry, and enough is enough. And I think you're seeing a younger generation come into the fold and recognizing that this is happening. Like, I've seen videos where dogs are being sicked on Black people in the 60s down in the South, and you like to think that that's in the past. But then when you're on the streets in Minneapolis, when you're on the streets in Portland and you're seeing federal troops shooting like ballistic batons and rubber bullets at people who are simply expressing, their anger through their First Amendment right, you start to think shit, man, this is real. This is not the 60s. This is still happening. And you get angry, right? And almost to the point, you're angry and you're exhausted, almost to the point of just giving up. But that's really not an option, because you know what happens if you give up, but you don't necessarily know what happens if you fight.
In a sense, I kind of feel like the moral imperative of making sure Black Americans are truly equal citizens has been sharpened. Like, we knew it before, but now it's like, if it doesn't happen, then it's a moral failure of us, of our generation, right? Like, we're kind of the uncles at the function at this point.
Right.
And like, I got into doing journalism in a large part because of looking at pot arrests and seeing like, oh, wow, like Black people are being arrested more. The end of the war on drugs seemed like something that was moving, end of mass incarceration, a kind of consciousness around policing the carceral state and how we treat people. There's more than just policing, though, right? And you've done a lot of work documenting that as well. What, if any, crossover, crossfade between like stopping police brutality towards Black Americans and the larger goal, perhaps, of an economic justice for Black Americans?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the economic justice, and you spoke about the moral imperative, and more times than not, the moral imperative is not strong enough to combat the economic benefits of those in power for staying in power. You know what I'm saying? So am I gonna spend my money, or am I going to subscribe to the moral imperative that this is not something that I should actually be doing, right? And so for those who are in power, if they have to choose between money and moral imperative, they're probably gonna choose money. And that's the problem, right? And that permeates this system that America is built on, right? Systemic racism.
I think a lot of reasonable people out there, given what's happened over the last year, are gonna say like, yes, police are oftentimes more violent towards Black people.
Yeah.
We've seen it, we've seen the numbers, we've seen the videos, we know this now. However, there's another step, which is the police are just a part of
a larger system.
Exactly.
Right.
And so that larger system often, it's like you look at household income, household wealth.
Yes.
You look at these markers of prosperity and who America is working for and who America is working against and how to dismantle that. And I think what you're trying to say is like, when it hits your pocketbook.
Yeah, it's very difficult to dismantle that just on a moral imperative alone, right? And I think that's why people are in the streets, right? There are some people who have recognized to themselves that we can't appeal to their sense of morality. The only thing that they answer to is money and violence. And so we gotta either hit them in the pocketbook or take it to the streets and let them know that we're not backing down. And if we have to resort to violence, we will. And in looking at that, you know, that was last year, right? And how much time do you have in between these horrific acts of violence against Black and brown people, right? So right now, it's, you know, you could generously call what we're in right this very moment peacetime. But in any second, we could look at our phone right now and see another video. And every time you see another video, it just reignites this like depressive thought that nothing is ever gonna change. But then, to your point earlier, it's like, you just gotta wake up the next day and say, I gotta do something and figure this shit out. And these are the people that are constantly in the streets trying to make a change through nonprofit organizations, through marching, and even, you know, I mean, just last year, Black gun ownership went up 60%.
Sure.
You know, so Black folks are like, you know, if the police aren't gonna protect us, then we have to protect ourselves.
A lot of this to me comes down to holding two ideas in your head at the same time. First idea being America is a country built on racism and white supremacy. Second idea is maybe America is the only place that could make really significant strides towards a kind of equality. And I wonder, given the work that you've done abroad with Black communities in other countries, like, what are the stakes for America getting it right? Like, is there a heightened exceptionalism, maybe we'll call it, for the United States of America, a place where Black Americans have given so much to our culture, to our economy, to everything, to actually get it right and say, here are the systemic changes that we can make so that our fellow citizens can be equal?
I mean, for better or for worse, America is a leader in the world. Cultural leader, economic leader, you know, and the stories that I covered abroad with regard to discrimination against Black people in other places, it was encouraging, but also discouraging. It was encouraging that, you know, the people that are on the streets here in America and protesting and, Black Lives Matter. Those folks had a significant influence on people in Italy, on Black folks in Israel, right? In which they used the BLM movement here as a model to tackle the specific racism in those countries, which is different than the racism here, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, it's promising, it's encouraging. Now, America as a country, I think it's scary if the world is looking to us as an example of how to tackle this problem of racism. Because there are many people that are still in power who either are willfully ignorant or just recognize that we're in power and we have to figure out a way to stay in power. And their idea of staying in power is oppressing Black people in a way that, if you feel like you give equal rights to Black and brown people, then your privilege and your rights are taken away. And that, I think, is a significant misunderstanding that keeps us in this vicious cycle.
And there's a lot of performative understanding that happens too, right? I'm thinking specifically of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the Kente cloth. There's performative allyship that meets the moment, so to speak.
if so to speak.
Yeah, right. But then there's also that can be cover for not getting anything done. And I think there's some people who might fear that okay, Derek Chauvin found guilty. That means that we solved the problem. He was the bad apple. It was so egregious, we all saw it. But come on, police are here to protect us. Come on, you got your shot. Why are you complaining? You know what I mean? The performative stuff, I want to talk about that because I think it's interesting. We haven't talked about that. There are times where it makes you cringe a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I mean, when I saw Pelosi and them kneeling with the Kente cloth, I was like, bro, they look like a HBCU step team. That's what they look like. And then they can say that they did something. The performative aspect is very dangerous. It's to me, no clap is better than one clap. If you're in a room and someone has just finished performing and you hear one person clap, I'd rather just, if I'm the performer, I'm just no, don't support me in that respect. So when you see these performances by leaders, by IG models in the street, hashtagging BLM and whatnot. Corporations, absolutely. It's dangerous because they feel like that they've fulfilled a need or that they've solved part of the problem by doing this. There's a possibility that they walk away from that saying, yeah, we did that, we supported the movement. No, you didn't support shit by putting a black square on your Instagram page and you're a multi-billion-dollar company, It's like going to the gym and you just talking to people and you don't work out, but then for the rest of the day, you telling people, yeah, I went to the gym, I go to the gym every morning, but you ain't doing nothing, right? So if the performance leads to substance, I'm fine. Perform your heart out. Look silly, get roasted on Twitter and TikTok and all of that, but I can say that, yeah, I'm roasting them, but if you peel back a layer, they actually instituted some policies that will actually lead to some substantive change. But if you're just up there, hashtagging and kneeling in your Kente cloth that you ordered on Amazon next day, then we got problems.
Well, and that's kind of what's remained to be seen, right? There is a lot of people in this generation of young people who did put a black square up on Instagram, who have a hashtag BLM in their bio, but are, they're living their lives, right? They might not have experienced the phenomenological reality of being a black American, but at least they're I understand and I'm an ally. The question is what happens next? What happens not this year, but what happens in the year that follows, the year that follows that, and the year that follows that, and even beyond?
Yeah.
And does this generation become a generation that knows intrinsically in their bones that America is a racist country and that we can say that and still be I like living in America. I love being an American. And I want to change it.
Absolutely. I rock with America. My kinfolks built this place. You know what I'm saying? You ain't gonna get rid of me that easy. You know what I'm saying? I think what happened with George Floyd, it put it on Front Street, where you pretty much couldn't ignore it. My fear is, even though the new generation, the younger generation now, they see like, oh, yes, police brutality against brown and black people, that is racist, right? But it takes some extra effort to understand the depth of systemic racism with regard to education, healthcare, housing, right? Like education reform. Within education reform, there are people who will tag a school district as a poor school district in order to take it over. And then they use tax dollars to subsidize private development. And then you see gentrification. And so the money that was supposed to help reform the schools is now used to build up neighborhoods and communities that push those very people out, right? So that's systemic racism, right? And so I don't know if the younger generation will be able to see that kind of racism in the same way that we saw the racism against George Floyd and other victims of police brutality, because that's right in front of your face.
Sure, invisible violence of economic destitution, of taking things away from people, even before they have a chance to get it. That's sort of the next step. But so visibility is such an important thing, and I think like you look back to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? Like people saw that on TV, they saw the violence. People saw George Floyd slowly murdered. What can you see about the next step? Like how do you tell those stories about the next step of this movement of making sure people are equal?
I mean, I'd like to think that's what we're trying to do here. You've told stories about, folks that are disenfranchised and that would be invisible if not have given a voice through what you've, allowed them to tell through these stories. We did a story about the racial land gap and how, land is connected to freedom, right? You own land, it's the very foundation from which generational wealth is built. And so I think just in terms of what you and I can do is just continue to give voice to these folks who are disenfranchised and discriminated against in a way that a larger audience in the world can see this in the same way that they saw George Floyd, and hopefully be inspired to say, this shit is fucked up. In the way that we saw George Floyd killed, this is fucked up in the way that we are seeing these people get taken advantage of because they're black, because they're brown, because they're trans,
Last question. Where were you when you first saw the video of George Floyd being killed?
Man, I was at home at my desk, and I think I saw something on Instagram, and I went to news sites, and it was up all over the place, and my reaction was, motherfucker. Like, it's not revenge that black people want. It's just to be treated fairly, to be treated equally. That's it. Just want to live, and it's really unfortunate to, when I'm driving and I see a police car behind me, that something happens inside, right? And I fully recognize that every cop is not a Derek Chauvin,
Sure.
But I also recognize that this person is a human being with a weapon that can kill me, that may be victim to biases, right, against me, whether in their control or not.
Yeah.
They grew up a certain way. They have a certain opinion of me just by virtue of the way I look, And that, to me, makes me angry because all I want to do as a black person in America is simply maximize my potential as a human being, just like everyone else.
It's just such an accident, that like I was born me and you were born you, and like the circumstances we came up in, that we're here, or other people are other places, people who have privilege. Like we tend to give ourselves a lot of credit for who we are and our status.
Right.
But like blind luck.
Yeah.
To me, the moral imperative there is like, there ain't no reason I'm me and not someone else. So that's it.
But those in power have to recognize that they were born into privilege. And you can use that privilege in a way that helps those who are not privileged, without taking away from the privilege that you have.
Mm-hmm. You talk about white people, right?
White folks.
All right, Alzo, thank you.
Oh, for
good
sure,
to see
man.
you.
Anytime, man. Always good to have a chat with my dog, Krishna.